The sun hung merciless over the Dragoon Mountains, beating down on the ramshackle trading post that squatted like a dusty toad at the edge of civilization. Fort Grant's shadow barely reached this far, and the law reached even less. It was the kind of place where men asked no questions and women drew no stares, no matter what devils followed at their heels. Annabeth Forsyth arrived as the afternoon heat shimmered off the cracked earth, her mare's hooves stirring clouds of alkali dust. She wore a traveling dress of brown wool, practical but well-made, now bearing the stains of hard miles. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed her face, but it couldn't hide the determined set of her jaw or the way her green eyes swept the trading post like a hawk searching for prey, or predators. The saddlebags across her mare's flanks hung heavy, and when she dismounted, she kept one hand close to them. The other rested near the pocket of her skirt, where the outline of something small and deadly pressed against the fabric. Inside the trading post, conversation died like a candle snuffed. 3 men at a makeshift bar turned to study her. A Mexican trader paused in his haggling. Even the flies seemed to quiet their buzzing. Annabeth walked to the proprietor, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained whiskers, and set a leather pouch on the scarred wooden counter. "I need a guide," she said. Her voice carried the soft vowels of Virginia breeding, but there was steel beneath the silk. "Someone who knows the northern routes, through Apache territory to the Montana border." The proprietor's eyes dropped to the pouch. When she loosened the drawstring, the unmistakable gleam of gold caught the lamplight, but it was the dark stain on the leather, brown as old blood, that made him step back. "Lady, ain't nobody fool enough to take that trail, not with the Apaches stirred up like they are. And especially not with—" He trailed off, his gaze flicking between her face and the blood-stained pouch. "With what?" Annabeth's voice remained steady, but her fingers tightened on the strings. A man at the bar, whiskey-brave and sun-foolish, spoke up. "With a woman who's got her husband's blood on her gold." The silence that followed could have been carved with a Bowie knife. Annabeth neither confirmed nor denied, merely swept her gaze across the room like a queen surveying peasants. "My business is my own. I pay well for discretion and skill. If there's no one here man enough, I ain't taking blood money from no murderess." This from the Mexican trader, crossing himself. "Then starve with your principles," Annabeth replied coolly. The argument might have escalated, but the door creaked open. A man entered, bringing with him the scent of leather, gunpowder, and the indefinable wildness of the deep desert. He moved with the fluid economy of someone who'd learned that wasted motion could mean death. Dark hair hung past his collar, and a week's worth of stubble shadowed a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so marked by sun and hardship. Calder Rourke. Every man in the room shifted slightly, the way rabbits do when a wolf appears. The scout was known from Tucson to Fort Bowie, not famous. For fame got men killed, but known to those who needed knowing. He'd tracked Apache raiders for the army, guided wagon trains through hell, and lived alone in the mountains for months at a time. Some said he was half Apache himself. Others said he'd gone native after too many years in the wilderness. All agreed he was the best at what he did, and that what he did wasn't always pretty. His gray eyes, pale as winter sky, found Annabeth immediately. He studied her with the patient intensity of a man reading sign, taking in the quality of her dress, the steadiness of her hands, the way she held herself like she expected trouble and wouldn't flinch from it. "You're the one asking about passage north," he said. Not a question. "I am?" She met his gaze without wavering. "The compensation is generous." Calder moved to the bar, poured himself a whiskey from the bottle the barkeep hastily provided, and downed it in one swallow. "Don't need your gold." Hope flickered and died in Annabeth's eyes, but her expression remained composed. "Then good day to you, sir." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Didn't say I wouldn't take you. Said I don't need your gold." Annabeth faced him again, wariness replacing disappointment. "Every man has a price." "That's true." Calder set down his glass with deliberate care. "Mine ain't gold." "Then what?" He smiled. And it was neither kind nor cruel, merely honest in the way a knife blade is honest. Truth. Every night on the trail, you tell me one true thing about why you're running, about what's chasing you, about whose blood is on that gold. The trading post held its collective breath. Annabeth's hand moved unconsciously to her skirt pocket, then stilled. And if I refuse? Then you can try your luck with the next scout. Course, there ain't one within 100 miles who'll take you through Apache territory. Not for any price. You're very sure of yourself. I'm sure of what I know. And I know you're running from something worse than Apache or bandits. Or you wouldn't be this desperate. He poured another whiskey but didn't drink it. Just turned the glass in his fingers. I also know that whatever you done, you had your reasons. I ain't judging, but I won't guide a woman who can't trust me with her truth. Annabeth stood still as a church statue while calculations flickered behind her green eyes. Finally, she gave a short nod. When do we leave? Sundown, cooler travel, and fewer eyes to mark our passing. Calder drained his whiskey and stood. Get what supplies you need. 2 canteens each. Dried beef, hardtack, nothing that rattles or shines. And lady, he paused at the door. Whatever iron you're carrying in that skirt pocket, make sure you know how to use it. Where we're going, there's no room for bluff. After he left, the proprietor found his voice. Ma'am, begging your pardon, but that man, he ain't like others. They say he lived with the Apache for a winter. Say he killed his own partner once, out in the superstitions. They say many things, Annabeth replied, counting out coins for supplies. They say I killed my husband. Does that make it true? The proprietor had no answer for that. As the sun began its descent toward the ragged horizon, Annabeth stood beside her loaded mare, watching Calder check his own mount and pack horse with methodical precision. He'd traded his worn shirt for a cleaner one, though it too bore the stains of hard use. A Winchester rode in his saddle scabbard, and a Colt Navy rested on his hip, the holster tied down in the manner of men who expected to need it quick. Second thoughts? He asked without looking up from adjusting a pack strap. No. Annabeth swung up into her saddle with practiced ease. Though I wonder if you have terms beyond our nightly exchange. Stay quiet when I say, move when I say, if I tell you to ride, you ride hard and don't look back. He mounted his own horse, a rangy bay that looked like it could run forever. And if shooting starts, you get low and stay low. I can't guide a corpse. They rode out as the sun painted the mountains blood red, 2 figures dark against the dying light. Behind them, the trading post dwellers watched until the desert swallowed them whole. Fool woman, muttered the Mexican trader. She rides with her own death. The proprietor spat tobacco juice into the dust. Maybe so, but I'm thinking it ain't hers he's interested in. As darkness crept across the desert, Annabeth and Calder made camp in a wash where ancient floods had carved shelter into the rock. The spot was defensible, with clear sight lines in 3 directions and solid stone at their backs. Calder built a small fire, just enough to heat coffee and push back the immediate darkness. Annabeth tended her mare, her movements efficient despite the feminine cut of her dress. When she joined him by the fire, she sat with her back straight, hands folded, every inch the proper lady except for the revolver now openly worn at her hip. First night, Calder said, handing her a tin cup of coffee. First truth. She accepted the cup, inhaling the bitter steam. In the firelight, her face was all plains and shadows, beautiful in the way a desert storm is beautiful, dangerous, and compelling in equal measure. My name, she said finally, is Annabeth Forsyth, and yes, I killed my husband. The coyotes began their chorus as the moon rose, their wild songs echoing off the canyon walls. Annabeth lay rigid in her bedroll, every sound magnified in the darkness, the pop of settling embers, the distant screech of an owl, the soft snort of the horses. Though the night was cool, she didn't move closer to the fire. Pride, perhaps, or the habits of someone who'd learned that accepting comfort came with a price. Calder sat against a boulder, rifle across his knees, hat tipped back as he watched the stars wheel overhead. He didn't look at her, but she felt his awareness like a physical thing, the way one feels a storm building beyond the horizon. "Can't sleep if you're wound tighter than a watch spring," he said eventually. "I'm fine." "Sure you are." He shifted, checking the approaches to their camp with practiced ease. "That why you're shaking?" Annabeth pressed her palms flat against the ground, willing the tremors to stop. It wasn't cold that made her shake, but the memory of other nights, other camps, when she'd lain still as death while her husband... She cut off that line of thought with brutal efficiency. Dawn came pale and merciless, revealing a landscape of broken stone and thorny ocotillo. They broke camp in silence, Calder reading the land while Annabeth secured the packs. As they mounted up, he gestured toward a narrow defile between two rust-colored ridges. "Skeleton Canyon's that way, shorter by 2 days, but that's Apache hunting ground. We go around, through the mining camps. Whatever you think best." Her voice was carefully neutral, but Calder caught the flash of relief in her eyes. She wasn't eager to test herself against Apache warriors. Smart woman. They rode through country that seemed designed to break hearts and bones in equal measure. The trail, such as it was, wound between stands of palo verde and mesquite, climbing steadily into the Chiricahua foothills. By midday, the heat was a living thing, pressing down like a flat iron. Annabeth had long since abandoned propriety, loosening the collar of her dress and pushing her sleeves up to her elbows. Sweat traced clean lines through the dust on her face. It was then they saw him, a small figure stumbling between the rocks, no bigger than a child of 10 or 12 years. Apache. By the look of his dress and the pattern of his moccasins, blood painted his left side, and he moved with the careful gait of someone holding their insides in place. Annabeth reined in hard. "He's hurt. I can see that." Calder's voice was flat, his hand already on his rifle. "Could be bait. Apache don't usually let their young ones wander alone." But Annabeth was already dismounting, pulling her medical supplies from the saddlebags. The boy saw them and froze, dark eyes wide with pain and fear. He tried to run but collapsed after 3 steps, a soft cry escaping his lips. "Get back on your horse," Calder ordered. "Now." Instead, Annabeth moved toward the boy, hands visible and empty. She spoke softly, nonsense words meant to soothe, the way one might gentle a spooked colt. The boy watched her approach with the fatalism of someone who expected death and was too tired to fight it anymore. "You damn fool, woman!" Calder hissed, but he was already scanning the ridge lines, rifle ready. "You're going to get us both killed." Annabeth knelt beside the boy, her hands gentle as she examined the wound, a deep gash along his ribs, likely from a fall rather than a weapon. She worked quickly, cleaning and binding the wound with torn strips from her petticoat, all while the boy watched her with eyes old beyond his years. When she finished, she pressed her canteen into his hands. He drank greedily, then tried to hand it back. She shook her head, pointing north toward the mountains where his people might be. The boy understood. He struggled to his feet, swayed, then steadied himself. Before leaving, he reached into a pouch at his waist and pulled out a small piece of turquoise, pressing it into Annabeth's palm. Then he was gone, melting into the landscape like smoke. Calder was on her before she could stand, hauling her to her feet with enough force to make her gasp. "You don't understand what you just did. That boy could be running straight to a war party, could have been watching us, waiting for one of us to separate from the other. He was a child," Annabeth shot back, jerking free of his grip. "A hurt child. Out here, children kill same as men." His gray eyes were storm-dark with fury. "You think kindness means anything in this country? You think it'll stop a bullet or turn an arrow? I think it's what separates us from animals. Animals survive out here. Kind people get shallow graves." He stalked back to his horse, movements sharp with anger. "Mount up. We've wasted enough time." They rode in tense silence until late afternoon, when Calder finally called a halt at a seep spring hidden beneath an overhang of yellow stone. As the horses drank, he rounded on her again. You want to know what's chasing you? Fine, but I need to know what kind of fool I'm guiding. That stunt with the boy, I couldn't just leave him." The words burst out of her, surprising them both with their vehemence. "I've done enough leaving, enough looking away." Something in her voice made Calder pause. He studied her with those patient wolf eyes, seeing past the dust and sweat to something deeper. "This is about more than your husband." It wasn't a question, but Annabeth answered anyway. Her hands shook as she refilled her canteen, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of old grief. "I had a sister, Sarah, 15 years old, sweet as spring honey. When things got bad, I thought about leaving. Planned it, even, but I was a coward. Told myself I was protecting her by staying, by keeping his attention on me." She laughed, a broken sound that had nothing to do with humor. "He found her anyway. One night when I was at the general store, said later she'd been making eyes at the hired hands, needed teaching about proper behavior. Her knuckles went white around the canteen. She died 3 days later, internal bleeding. The doctor said nothing he could do." Calder said nothing, just watched as she fought for composure. "So yes," Annabeth continued, voice steady now, cold as winter stone. "I killed my husband, shot him in his own bed with his own gun. And I'd do it again, except this time I'd do it 3 days sooner." The confession hung between them like a challenge. Calder could have said many things. That violence bred violence. That the law would see it different. That she'd thrown her life away for revenge. Instead, he simply nodded. "Get some rest," he said. "We ride at moonrise." That night, their second on the trail. Annabeth didn't pretend to sleep. She sat by the dying fire, the piece of turquoise cool in her palm, while Calder kept watch. The coyotes sang again, but this time their song seemed less like a threat and more like a lament for all the broken things that found their way to the desert to die or be reborn. "My turn," Calder said suddenly. "For a truth." Annabeth looked up, surprised. "I didn't think that was part of our bargain." "It wasn't." He shifted, his profile sharp against the stars. "I had a sister too, Mary Catherine. Sweetest little thing, all ribbons and laughs. I was scouting for the army, gone for months at a time. Told myself the money was worth it, that I was providing for her and Ma." His voice was flat, emotionless, which somehow made it worse. "Comancheros hit our place while I was chasing shadows in Mexico. By the time I got back, wasn't enough left to bury proper." "I'm sorry," Annabeth whispered. "Don't be sorry. Sorry doesn't change anything." He looked at her then, and she saw her own grief reflected in his eyes. "But I understand about the leaving, about the looking away, and I understand why you couldn't do it twice." They sat in silence as the fire died to embers. When Calder finally spoke again, his voice was gruff. "That boy today. Could have been bait, but probably wasn't. Apache don't usually sacrifice their young for ambush. You did right by him, but you were angry. I was scared." He admitted, "Been a long time since I guided anyone I gave a damn about losing." The words settled between them like a promise or a threat. Annabeth didn't ask which one he meant them to be. Some truths were better left unexamined in the dark, where hope and fear looked too much alike to tell apart. The riders appeared at dawn on the 4th day, dark specks against the brightening horizon that grew into men and horses moving with grim purpose. Calder spotted them first, his body tensing like a drawn bowstring. "Company," he said quietly, already turning his horse toward a maze of red rock spires to the east. "Stay close and keep quiet." Annabeth didn't waste breath on questions. She followed as he led them into the labyrinth of stone, their horses' hooves muffled by centuries of sand. Behind them, she could hear the pursuit gaining, at least 5 riders, maybe more, their shouts echoing off the canyon walls. Calder navigated the twisting passages with the confidence of a man who'd used this refuge before. They climbed steadily, the way growing narrower until they had to dismount and lead the horses. Annabeth's dress caught on the rough stone, tearing. but she pressed on without complaint. A shot cracked through the morning air, the bullet whining off rock inches from Calder's head. He shoved Annabeth behind a boulder and returned fire, the Winchester barking sharp and sudden. One of the pursuers cried out and fell from his saddle. "Bounty hunters," Calder said between shots. "Someone raised the price on your head." They climbed higher, Calder covering their retreat with careful, measured shots. But the hunters knew their business. They spread out, trying to flank them, and soon bullets were coming from multiple directions. One caught Calder across the ribs, spinning him half around. He grunted but kept firing. "You're hit," Annabeth said, seeing blood seep through his shirt. "I've had worse. Keep moving." They reached a narrow ledge with a sheer drop on one side and solid rock on the other. Calder pushed Annabeth ahead of him, still firing back at their pursuers. His ammunition was running low, and they both knew it. "There," he pointed to a cleft in the rock face. "Get inside." The cleft opened into a shallow cave, barely large enough for 2 people. They pressed inside as bullets chipped stone around the entrance. Calder's breathing was labored now, pain etched in the lines of his face. "Let me see," Annabeth demanded. "Later. They'll rush us soon." But the attack didn't come. Instead, they heard voices, arguing, then hoofbeats, receding. Calder risked a look outside and saw the hunters retreating, helping their wounded companion. "Why are they leaving?" Annabeth asked. "Apache sign, probably. Or they decided we're not worth dying for." He slumped against the cave wall. "Now you can fuss." Annabeth's hands were steady as she helped him remove his shirt, though her breath caught at the side of his torso, not just from the fresh wound, but from the map of scars that told the story of a violent life. The bullet had gouged a furrow along his ribs, painful but not deep. "You'll live," she said, tearing more strips from her already ruined petticoat. Disappointed? Relieved. She worked in silence for a moment, aware of his eyes on her face. "This needs cleaning. It'll hurt. I've had worse," he said again. She poured whiskey from his flask over the wound. He didn't make a sound, but his jaw tightened and his hand clenched into a fist. As she wrapped the bandage, her fingers brushed the other scars, knife wounds, bullet holes, marks she couldn't identify. "Quite a collection," she said softly. "Every one a lesson learned." "What did they teach you?" "That I'm harder to kill than most men want to work for." His hand caught hers, stilling it against his chest. "Your hands are shaking now." They were. The steady control that had carried her through the gunfight was cracking, leaving her trembling like a leaf in a windstorm. "I thought, when I saw the blood, takes more than one bullet to put me down. Wildcat." The nickname surprised them both. Calder released her hand, but the space between them had changed, charged with something that had nothing to do with gratitude or medical care. They waited until full dark before leaving the cave, moving carefully through the night-black passages. Calder led them north and east, away from the main trail, into country so rough even Apache rarely ventured there. They made cold camp in a grove of juniper, not daring a fire that might draw attention. Annabeth sat close to him, closer than previous nights. "How's the pain?" "I'll manage. You did good back there. Kept your head. Didn't panic." "I've had practice." The words came out bitter. "My husband liked his games. Liked to see how much I could take before I broke. But you didn't break." "Didn't I?" She laughed softly. "I'm running across the desert with a fortune in blood money. Every lawman in the territory hunting me. Seems pretty broken to me." Calder shifted, wincing slightly. In the darkness, she felt rather than saw him move closer. Broken things can be the strongest, like canyon walls. It's the cracks that make them beautiful. Speaking from experience, maybe. His hand found her face in the darkness, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Maybe I recognize a fellow survivor when I see one." The touch was gentle, nothing like the rough handling she'd known. It undid something in her, some last defense she'd held in reserve. She turned her face into his palm, lips brushing against the calluses there. "Annabeth." Her name was a warning, or perhaps a question. "I know what I'm doing," she whispered. "For the first time in years, I know exactly what I'm doing." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like she expected. Not rough or demanding, but careful, as if she were something precious that might shatter if handled wrong. She made a soft sound against his mouth, part surprise, part need, and his control slipped, his hand tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and she went willingly, eagerly. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Calder rested his forehead against hers. "This is a bad idea." "Probably. You're paying me to guide you, not—" "I'm not paying you anything, remember? Just truth." She pulled back enough to see his face in the starlight. "And the truth is, I haven't felt alive in 3 years. Not until now. Not until you—" He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Wildcat. But we do this. We do it with eyes open. No promises, no pretty words. Just two people taking comfort where they can find it." "I don't want pretty words," Annabeth said. "I've had enough lies to last a lifetime." They spread their bedrolls together that night, careful of his injured side. Calder held her against him, her back to his chest, his arm protective around her waist. She felt the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his breath against her neck, and for the first time since she'd pulled the trigger on her husband, the shaking finally stopped. "Truth for tonight," she said into the darkness. "I'm terrified. Not of being caught, not of hanging. I'm terrified that I'll never feel anything but this anger, this emptiness, that he killed something in me that can't come back." Calder's arm tightened around her. "Truth for truth. Then, I'm terrified too. Been alone so long I forgot what it felt like to give a damn. Easier that way. Safer." He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "You're making me remember things I buried with my sister. Is that bad? Ask me when we reach Montana." They lay quiet after that, two damaged souls finding shelter in each other while the desert night stretched endless around them. In the distance, a screech owl called, its cry like a lost soul seeking home. But for now, for these few stolen hours, they had found something that might, if they were very lucky, be enough. Neither spoke of what would happen when the trail ended. Some truths were too sharp to handle in the dark, when hope was just another word for the lies people told themselves to make it through to morning. The bounty hunters found them again near Dutchman's Creek, where the trail narrowed between two walls of crumbling shale. This time there were 8 of them, and they came prepared. The first shot took Calder's horse out from under him, sending him rolling into the brush. Annabeth wheeled her mare around, reaching for him, but he was already up and running, shouting for her to ride. She didn't. Instead, she dismounted in a fluid motion, slapping her horse's rump to send it running while she dove for cover beside him. Her navy colt was in her hand before she hit the ground. "I told you to run!" Calder snarled, firing at the advancing riders. "And leave you? Not likely." She squeezed off a shot that sent one man tumbling from his saddle. "I'm done with running." They fought side by side, using every rock and scrub bush for cover. The hunters had them pinned, but they paid for every inch of ground. Annabeth proved she knew her way around a gun, placing shots with cool precision while Calder's Winchester sang its deadly song. But numbers tell, and soon they were being flanked. A big man with a scarred face came at them from the left, revolver blazing. Calder turned to meet him, but his rifle clicked empty. The scarred man grinned, raising his gun for the killing shot. Annabeth moved without thinking. She stepped in front of Calder, her own gun coming up. 2 shots cracked almost as one. The scarred man staggered, a red bloom spreading across his chest. Annabeth gasped, looking down at her left arm where blood was already soaking through her sleeve. "No?" Calder caught her as she swayed, pulling her behind a boulder. His hands were gentle but urgent as he examined the wound. "Clean through. You're lucky. Don't feel lucky." she managed through gritted teeth. The remaining hunters pressed their advantage, but something had changed in Calder. The controlled, methodical fighter was gone, replaced by something primal and terrible. He grabbed the scarred man's gun and went at them like a man possessed, moving through the rocks with lethal grace. When the smoke cleared, 3 more hunters were down and the rest were retreating, deciding the price had grown too steep. Calder returned to find Annabeth binding her own wound with grim determination. The sight of her, bloodied but unbroken, seemed to snap something inside him. He dropped to his knees beside her, pulling her roughly against him. "Don't you ever," his voice broke, "don't you ever step in front of a bullet for me again. Would you rather I watched you die?" "Yes." The word tore from him raw and ragged. "Better that than—" He stopped, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jump. "Then what?" She touched his face with her good hand. "Then losing someone else you care about." He caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest where his heart hammered wild as a trapped bird. "You don't understand. Everyone I've ever... They all end up in the ground. My sister, my partner, even my dog. I'm poison. Annabeth, I'm death walking. No!" She pulled him down until their foreheads touched. "You're just a man who's lost too much. But you're not losing me. Not today." The kiss that followed was desperate, fierce, full of fear and need and promises neither could voice. When thunder rumbled overhead and the first fat drops of rain began to fall, they were still clinging to each other like shipwrecked survivors in a storm. The rain came hard and sudden, typical of desert storms. They took shelter in a shallow cave, Calder building a small fire while Annabeth shivered in her soaked clothes. Her wound needed proper tending, and they both knew it. "You need to get out of those wet things," he said, not looking at her. "Catch your death otherwise." She smiled despite the pain. "Speaking as a medical professional? Speaking as a man who doesn't want to dig your grave." She struggled with the buttons of her dress, her injured arm making it difficult. After watching her fumble for a moment, Calder cursed under his breath and moved to help. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as they worked the buttons free, careful not to jostle her wound. "There," he said, voice rough. "I'll turn my back while you—" "Don't!" The word was soft but certain. "Please, just don't turn away." He went still, eyes searching hers in the firelight. What he saw there made him swallow hard. "Annabeth, I know what this is," she said quickly. "I know it can't last, but right now, in this moment, I need to feel something besides pain and anger. I need to remember I'm more than just a woman running from her past." "You are more," he said fiercely. "So much more." He helped her out of the wet dress with infinite care, his touch reverent rather than passionate, when she sat before him in only her chemise and bloomers, shivering from cold and reaction. He wrapped his own blanket around her shoulders. "Your turn," she said. "That bandage needs changing." They tended each other's wounds in the dancing firelight, the intimacy of the act more powerful than any passion. When Annabeth's fingers traced the scars on his chest, learning each one like a map of survival, Calder caught her hand. "That one?" she asked, touching a puckered mark near his heart. "Apache arrow. Should have killed me. Would have. Except their medicine man decided I was too stubborn to die and might be useful alive." "Were you? Useful?" "I learned their ways. Lived with them one winter when the army left me for dead." His thumb stroked over her knuckles. "That's what the men at the trading post whisper about. That I went native. That I'm more Apache than white now. Is that what you believe? I believe I'm whatever I need to be to survive. Same as you." He raised her hand to his lips. "But with you, I remember who I was before, who I might be again." The storm raged outside their shelter, but inside, they created their own world. They made love slowly, carefully, mindful of injuries but desperate for connection. It was nothing like the rough fumbling Annabeth had known with her husband. Nothing like the empty encounters Calder had sought in frontier towns. This was something else entirely, Two souls recognizing each other in the darkness, claiming each other with touch and breath and wordless sounds of need. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to the rain drum against stone. Annabeth traced lazy patterns on Calder's chest while he played with her hair, now loose and wild around her shoulders. "Tell me about her," she said quietly. "Your sister." "Mary Catherine." The name came out soft, tender. 11 years old, loved butterflies and singing and making up stories. Used to follow me everywhere, chattering like a magpie. His voice caught. "I was supposed to protect her. You were one man. You couldn't be everywhere. I should have been there. Should have chosen her over the army's gold." Annabeth rose on her elbow to look at him. "And I should have shot my husband the first time he raised his hand to me. Should have taken Sarah and run before it was too late. We can torture ourselves with shoulds until we're mad, or we can accept that we did the best we could with what we knew then. Is that what you've done? Accepted it?" "I'm trying." She laid her head back on his chest. "Some days are harder than others. But this, being here with you, it helps. It reminds me there's still good in the world. Still reasons to keep going." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "What happens when we reach Montana?" "I get my sister free. After that," she shrugged. "After that? I don't know. Maybe I'll disappear, become someone else. It's a big country. And if I asked you not to disappear? If I asked you to try this, us, without the running and the bullets?" She lifted her head to meet his eyes. "Are you asking?" "Maybe. Would you say yes? Ask me when we reach Montana." She echoed his earlier words back to him. He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "Fair enough. Wildcat. Fair enough." The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the desert washed clean and sparkling. They rode double on Annabeth's mare, Calder's arms around her, both watching for signs of pursuit. But the land stretched empty in all directions, and for the first time since leaving the trading post, Annabeth felt something that might have been hope. It was a dangerous feeling. She knew. Hope was what got people killed out here. But as Calder pressed a kiss to her neck and murmured something about finding another horse at the next settlement, she let herself imagine a future where they both survived, where Montana wasn't an ending but a beginning, where two broken people might build something whole. The nights grew cooler as they climbed into the high country, leaving the desert behind for pine forests and mountain meadows. They'd acquired a second horse at a mining camp, trading some of Annabeth's gold for a sturdy Mustang and fresh supplies. No one asked questions when Calder's hand rested on his gun, and Annabeth's eyes promised trouble to anyone who looked too close. They made camp beside a crystal stream, the sound of water over stones a luxury after so many dry miles. Annabeth sat on a fallen log, watching Calder clean fish he'd caught for their supper. The domestic simplicity of it made her heart ache with dangerous longing. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "Just thinking. Dangerous habit in a woman." But his tone was teasing, and when he glanced at her, his eyes were warm. "What's rattling around in that head of yours?" "The truth?" She picked up a pine cone, turning it in her fingers. "I was thinking this feels like playing house, like we're just two ordinary people without prices on our heads or ghosts at our backs. Nothing wrong with pretending, now and then. Isn't there?" She tossed the pine cone into the stream. "Every mile north we ride, I feel the weight getting heavier. Not the gold, the knowing." Calder set aside the fish and moved to sit beside her. "Knowing what?" "That it has to end. That even if we get Sarah free, even if we make it out of Montana alive, I'll always be looking over my shoulder. And you—" She touched the healing scar on his ribs. "You can't keep standing between me and bullets. Watch me. Calder—" He silenced her with a kiss, deep and claiming. When they broke apart, his hands framed her face. "Stop borrowing trouble. Wildcat, we've got enough real problems without you inventing new ones." As if to prove his point, the crack of a rifle split the evening air. The log where they'd been sitting exploded in a shower of splinters. Calder rolled, pulling Annabeth with him, as more shots followed. Not bounty hunters this time. The rhythm was wrong. The tactics different. "Stay down," Calder hissed, already moving toward his rifle. But these weren't random pursuers. They were professionals, and they'd planned well. Men emerged from three sides, guns trained and steady. The leader, a thin man with dead eyes and a marshal's star, stepped into view. "Annabeth Forsyth," he called. "By order of the territorial judge, you're under arrest for the murder of Jacob Forsyth. Come peaceful, and we won't hurt your companion." "Like hell," Calder growled, but Annabeth touched his arm. "How much?" she asked, her voice carrying clear and strong. "How much is the judge paying you to bring me back?" The marshal smiled, cold as winter moonlight. "More than you've got, woman, though I heard tell you made off with a considerable sum." "Blood money," one of the deputies spat. "Stolen from a good man." Annabeth laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Good man? Is that what Jacob told people? That he was good?" She stood slowly, ignoring Calder's urgent grip on her wrist. "Did he mention how he used his fists when the mine yields were low? How he liked to see bruises bloom on pale skin?" "Annabeth, don't," but she was past stopping. "Did he tell you about my sister? 15 years old, sweet as honey, until he decided she needed teaching? Did he mention how she died begging for help while he watched?" "Lies," the marshal said, but uncertainty flickered in some of the deputies' eyes. "Jacob Forsyth was a respectable—" "I've got the doctor's reports," Annabeth interrupted. "Got the testimony he was too scared to give while Jacob was alive. Got Sarah's diary, where she wrote what he did to her. You want to see respectable? I'll show you respectable." She reached for her saddlebags, and every gun swung toward her. But what she pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a leather journal, water-stained and worn. She tossed it at the marshal's feet. "Read it," she challenged. "Read what a 15-year-old girl wrote about your good man. Then tell me I was wrong to put him in the ground." The marshal didn't move to pick it up, but one of the younger deputies did. As he read, his face went white, then red. He looked up at Annabeth with something like horror. "Marshal Dixon, if this is true." "Doesn't matter if it's true," Dixon said flatly. "Law's the law. She killed him. She hangs for it." "The hell with your law," Calder said, speaking for the first time. "You want her, you go through me." Dixon studied him with professional interest. "You'd die for a murderess? I'd die for a woman who protected the only family she had left, same as any man worth his salt." Calder's smile was all teeth. "Question is, how many of you are ready to die for a judge's gold?" The standoff stretched taut as wire. Annabeth could feel Calder coiled beside her, ready to move. She knew he'd take some of them with him, maybe even give her a chance to run. But she also knew how it would end. "There's another way," she said quietly. "I've got gold, more than the judge is paying you. Take it and ride away. Tell him you lost our trail. Nobody has to die today." "Can't do that," Dixon said. "I got a reputation to—" His words cut off in a gurgle. An arrow sprouted from his throat, followed immediately by others finding their marks among his men. Apache warriors materialized from the forest like smoke given form, moving with deadly purpose. In the chaos that followed, Annabeth recognized one face, the boy she'd helped, now bearing fresh paint and a warrior's weapons. He met her eyes across the clearing and nodded once, repaying the debt. The fight was brief and brutal. The marshal's men, caught between Calder's rifle and Apache arrows, broke and ran. Those who didn't move fast enough didn't move again. When the dust settled, only Annabeth and Calder remained standing among the bodies. The Apache leader, an older man with a silver threading his black hair, approached them. He spoke to the boy in their language, then turned to Annabeth. "My grandson says you showed mercy when you could have shown fear. This is remembered. We're grateful." Annabeth managed, still shaking from the violence. "Gratitude is smoke," the warrior said. "But honor is stone. You travel north?" "To Montana," Calder answered. "Through the passes." The Apache leader considered this. The passes are watched. Soldiers, bounty hunters, men with greed in their eyes. But there are other ways. Old ways. He gestured to his warriors. We will show you. It wasn't a request, and both Annabeth and Calder knew better than to refuse. They gathered their belongings and followed the Apache deeper into the mountains, leaving the bodies for the scavengers. That night, they camped with the Apache band. Annabeth tended the wounds of warriors injured in the fight, her gentle hands earning nods of approval. Calder spoke with the leaders in a mixture of English, Spanish, and Apache, planning their route. Why help us? Annabeth asked the boy. White Eagle. She'd learned his name was, You helped me when I was alone and hurt, he answered in careful English. But more, you saw a child, not an enemy. This is rare among your people. Later, wrapped in blankets beside a fire, Annabeth whispered to Calder, Will they really show us a safe path? If they say they will. Yes, Apache don't lie about honor. He pulled her closer. You did more than save that boy's life. You might have saved ours. I couldn't have known. No, you couldn't. You just did what was right. He kissed her temple. That's one of the things I love about you. The word hung between them, unexpected and terrifying. Annabeth turned in his arms to search his face. Calder, I know, he said roughly. I know we said no promises, no pretty words. But watching you today, seeing you stand up to those men, knowing you'd rather die than go back. I can't pretend anymore. I love you, Annabeth. God help me, but I do. She was crying. She realized. When had that started? You can't. We can't. I'm a killer, a fugitive. You're a survivor, he corrected fiercely. A woman who did what she had to do. And if that makes you a killer, what does that make me? I've got more blood on my hands than you could spill in a lifetime. That's different. You were a soldier, a scout. I was a man with a gun, same as you. Only difference is, my killing was sanctioned by the government. He wiped her tears with his thumbs. If you're damned, wildcat, then we're damned together. She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and hope and desperate love into the contact. When they made love under the star-drunk sky, it was with the fierce tenderness of people who knew how easily tomorrow could be stolen. In the morning, the Apache would show them the hidden ways through the mountains. They would face more dangers, more men who wanted them dead or captured. But for this one night, they had each other and the truth between them. It was enough. It was everything. It was theirs. The Apache paths were older than memory, winding through high passes where the air grew thin and cold. For 3 days, they traveled with the band, learning the markers, a twisted pine here, a stack of stones there, signs invisible to untrained eyes. On the 4th morning, the Apache leader pulled Calder aside. From here, you go alone, he said, pointing north where snow still capped the peaks. Follow the river until it forks. Take the left path through Eagle's Cry Pass. Soldiers watch the right. They parted with mutual respect, the boy White Eagle pressing a small medicine pouch into Annabeth's hands. For protection, he said solemnly, and for remembering. The days that followed tested them both. The mountain passages were treacherous, made worse by late spring snowmelt that turned trails to mud and swelled streams to torrents. They climbed until their lungs burned, leading the horses more often than riding. At night, they huddled together for warmth, too exhausted for anything but sleep. It was at the highest point of the pass that disaster struck. The ledge gave way under Annabeth's mare, sending horse and rider tumbling toward the ravine below. Calder lunged forward, catching Annabeth's wrist just as she went over. For a heart-stopping moment, she dangled above certain death, their eyes locked. "Don't let go," she gasped. "Never," he growled, hauling her up with strength born of desperation. They lost the mare and half their supplies, but Annabeth was alive. That night, she clung to him and finally spoke the words she'd held back. "I love you too. I should have said it before. I love you." Calder Rourke. He held her tighter, pressing his face into her hair. "We're going to make it. Both of us. I swear it. 2 days later, they descended into Montana territory, and the world changed around them. The wild emptiness of Apache country gave way to mining towns and settlements, places where law had at least a foothold. They traded the last of their gold nuggets for fresh horses and supplies, keeping only enough coin for what lay ahead. In the town of Copper Creek, they finally learned where Sarah was being held. The proprietor of the general store, a gossipy woman with kind eyes, knew all the local scandals. Oh, the Forsyth girl? Poor little thing. That judge up in Helena bought her contract from the jail. She's working in that fancy house he runs, the Gilded Lily. The woman lowered her voice. It ain't a proper establishment, if you catch my meaning. Annabeth's knuckles went white around her coffee cup. Calder's hand found hers under the table. How far to Helena? He asked casually. 2 days' ride, if the weather holds. The woman studied them shrewdly. You folks got business there. Just passing through. Annabeth managed. They left within the hour, riding hard. As Helena's lights appeared in the valley below, Calder pulled up his horse. We need a plan, he said. Can't just ride in shooting. I know. Annabeth's voice was steady, but her eyes burned with fury. A judge who's supposed to uphold the law, and he's got my sister in a... She couldn't finish. We'll get her out. Calder studied the town below, his mind already working. I'll go in first, scout the place. You stay at the boarding house on the edge of town. No, the word came out flat and final. We go together. Or not at all. He started to argue, saw the set of her jaw, and nodded. Together. Then, the Gilded Lily squatted on Helena's main street like a painted toad. All false gilt and red velvet. Music spilled from its windows along with laughter and the clink of glasses. Calder and Annabeth entered through the back. Calder dressed as a gentleman gambler. Annabeth veiled like a respectable widow. The kitchen staff barely glanced up as they passed through. In places like this, blindness was a survival skill. They climbed the servants' stairs, Annabeth's heart hammering with each step. On the 3rd floor, they found her. Sarah sat in a small room, staring at nothing, wearing a silk dress that made her look even younger than her 16 years. When she saw Annabeth, her eyes went wide with shock, then filled with tears. Beth, her voice was barely a whisper. You're dead. They said you were dead. I'm here. Sweet girl, I'm here. Annabeth gathered her sister into her arms, feeling how thin she'd become. We're leaving right now. But Sarah pulled back, shaking her head. I can't. Judge Morrison. He owns my contract. He'll send men after us. He'll be dead if he tries, Calder said grimly, keeping watch at the door. Footsteps in the hallway cut short their reunion. Heavy steps, coming closer. Calder drew his gun, but Annabeth was already moving. She recognized those footsteps, the deliberate weight of them. Judge Morrison appeared in the doorway, a thick-set man with cruel eyes and soft hands. His gaze went from Sarah to Annabeth, and his face twisted with recognition. Well, the murderous widow come to claim her sister. He smiled coldly. I should thank you. She's been quite profitable. Annabeth's hand found the gun in her skirts, but Morrison was already drawing his own weapon. The space was too small. Sarah too close. Everything happened at once. Morrison fired. Calder shoved Annabeth aside and lunged forward. The two men grappled, crashing into the wall. Sarah screamed. More footsteps pounded up the stairs. Morrison's guards. Coming fast. The judge was stronger than he looked, fueled by greed and rage. He slammed Calder against the doorframe, raising his gun. Annabeth didn't think, didn't aim, just fired. The shot took Morrison in the chest, spinning him around. He looked surprised as he fell, as if he'd never imagined his sins might catch up to him. The window! Calder gasped, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Now! They went out onto the roof, Sarah between them, as shouts filled the building below. The night was chaos. Gunshots. Screams. Someone yelling about fire. They leaped to the next building, then the next. Calder leading them through routes he'd scouted earlier, in an alley. Horses waited, 3 of them, because Calder had planned even for this. They rode hard into the darkness, Helena falling behind them like a bad dream, miles outside town. They finally stopped at an abandoned miner's cabin. Sarah hadn't spoken since they'd fled, sitting silent and still as a ghost. Annabeth tried to coax her inside, but she pulled away. "Don't," Sarah whispered. I'm not clean anymore. What they made me do." "You're my sister," Annabeth said fiercely. "Nothing changes that. Everything changes it." Sarah's composure shattered. "You don't know what it was like. What I had to—" She broke off, sobbing. Calder stepped forward. "I know," he said quietly. "Not the same, but I know what it's like to survive things that make you feel like you'll never be clean again. The Apache taught me something, though they have a ceremony, a cleansing, not for the body, for the spirit." Sarah looked up at him through her tears. "Does it work? Sometimes, if you believe it can." He knelt beside her. "Your sister came through hell for you. I've seen her face down armed men, climb mountains, sacrifice everything. She did it all for love of you. That love, that's your cleansing. That's what makes you clean." It took time. Hours of tears and whispered confessions, of Annabeth holding her sister while she shook with remembered horror. But finally, as dawn touched the mountains, Sarah slept. Annabeth found Calder outside, standing watch. She leaned against him, exhausted in body and soul. "What now?" she asked. "North to Canada. I know people there, good people who'll help you start fresh." He turned to face her. "Both of you. All 3 of us." She corrected. "You're not leaving us now." "Calder Rourke, I won't let you." He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Wouldn't dream of it. Wildcat. Someone's got to keep you out of trouble and get me into it," she murmured, pulling him down for a kiss. When Sarah woke, they told her the plan. Canada, new names, new lives. The gold would buy them a start. A small ranch, maybe, or a trading post, somewhere quiet where the past couldn't follow. "Will we be safe?" Sarah asked, still fragile but with a spark of hope in her eyes. Calder and Annabeth exchanged a look. They both knew safety was relative, that the past had long arms, but they also knew that together they'd face whatever came. "We'll be together," Annabeth said. "That's what matters." As they rode north toward the promise of snow-clean mountains and new beginnings, Annabeth felt the weight she'd carried finally lifting. Behind them lay blood and sorrow. Ahead waited uncertainty. But in this moment, riding between the 2 people she loved most, she was complete. The territory might remember her as a murderess. History might paint her as a desperate woman driven to violence. But she knew the truth. She was a survivor, a protector, a woman who'd chosen love over law and never looked back. And someday, when the wounds had healed and the nightmares faded, she'd tell their story true. Not the sensational version the newspapers would print, but the real one. A story of 2 broken souls who'd found each other in the wilderness and discovered that sometimes the only redemption that matters is the kind you make for yourself. The Canadian border lay 3 days north, but they never made it that far. On the second night, camped by a stream in a grove of cottonwoods, their past finally caught them. Sarah had gone to fetch water when the first shot rang out, taking Calder high in the shoulder and spinning him to the ground. "Calder!" Annabeth reached for him, but more shots drove her behind a fallen log. Blood was already soaking through his shirt, spreading dark in the twilight. Men emerged from the trees, not bounty hunters this time, but marshals, badges glinting in the dying light, 6 of them, positioned to cut off any escape. Their leader, a graying man with tired eyes, called out, "Mrs. Forsyth, I'm Marshal Frank Brennan. We've got no quarrel with your sister or your companion if you come peaceable." Calder tried to rise, grimacing. His gun hand shook as he reached for his weapon. "Like hell she will." "Stay down," Annabeth hissed, pressing a hand to his wound. The blood seeped warm between her fingers. "You're hurt bad." "Been hurt worse," he lied, his face gray with pain. Sarah crept back through the brush, staying low. Her eyes went wide when she saw Calder's blood. But Annabeth shook her head sharply. "Not now. They couldn't afford panic now." "Mrs. Forsyth," Brennan called again. "Judge Morrison is dead. That changes things. Surrender now, and I guarantee you'll get a fair trial. Your sister can testify about the circumstances. Might be the jury shows mercy." "Mercy?" Annabeth laughed bitterly. "I've seen frontier mercy. Marshal, it comes at the end of a rope." She checked her ammunition. 6 shots in the Navy Colt, another dozen rounds in her pocket. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Calder's Winchester lay just out of reach, useless with his shoulder torn up. "Beth," Sarah whispered. "Maybe if you—" "No." Annabeth's voice was steel. "I won't let them take me. Not after everything." Calder caught her wrist with his good hand. "Listen to me. Take Sarah and run. I'll hold them." "Stop." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "No more noble sacrifices. We're past that." The marshals were moving, tightening their circle. Professional lawmen. Not like the rabble they'd faced before. These men knew their business. "1 minute, Mrs. Forsyth," Brennan warned. "Then we come in." Annabeth looked at Calder, bleeding in the dirt. At Sarah, trembling but trying to be brave. At the gun in her hand, heavy with the weight of choices already made. In the distance, she could see the mountains that marked the border. So close. They'd been so close. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not sure who she was apologizing to. Then louder, "All right, Marshal, I'm coming out." "No!" Calder struggled to sit up. "Annabeth, don't—" She kissed him, swift and fierce. "Take care of Sarah. Promise me." "Annabeth, promise me." "I promise." He choked out, "But damn you for making me." She stood slowly, laying her gun on the log. The marshals tensed, weapons trained on her. She took 1 step, then another, moving away from Calder and Sarah, away from any chance of a future. "That's far enough," Brennan said. "Hands where we can see them." She raised her hands, but as she did, she saw it, movement in the trees behind the marshals, shadows that shouldn't be there, shapes that moved with deadly purpose. The Apache struck like lightning. White Eagle led them, war paint stark against his young face. The marshals, focused on Annabeth, never saw them coming. Arrows whispered through the air. Men cried out, fell, scrambled for cover. In the chaos, Annabeth dove back to Calder and Sarah. "Can you ride?" "I'll ride to hell if it gets us out of here." Calder gritted out. They ran for the horses while the Apache kept the marshals pinned. White Eagle appeared at Annabeth's elbow, grinning fiercely. "The debt is paid," he said. "But friends help friends. Go! We will make sure they do not follow quickly." Sarah helped Calder into the saddle while Annabeth mounted behind him. Holding him steady, they rode hard through the darkness, Calder's blood warm on her hands. Sarah keeping pace beside them. Behind them. Gunfire and war cries split the night. They didn't stop until they reached a trapper's cabin Calder knew. Abandoned, but solid. Annabeth half carried him inside while Sarah saw to the horses. By lamplight, she examined the wound. The bullet had gone clean through, missing the lung but taking a piece of muscle with it. "You need a doctor," Sarah said, watching Annabeth clean the wound with whiskey. "No doctor would come this far, and we can't go to town." Annabeth worked with steady hands, though her heart was racing. "I'll have to do." She used skills learned in harder times, when her husband's violence meant doctors asked too many questions. Cleaned, stitched, bandaged. Calder bore it all in silence, though sweat beaded his forehead and his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. "There," she said finally. "If infection doesn't set in." It won't. His good hand found hers. Too stubborn to die now. Not when we're this close. But as the night wore on, fever took him. He thrashed and muttered, calling for people long dead. Annabeth bathed his face with cool water while Sarah kept watch at the window. "He's dying, isn't he?" Sarah asked quietly. "No." Annabeth's voice was fierce. "No, he's not. I won't let him." She talked to him through the darkness, telling him about the ranch they'd have in Canada, about the horses they'd raise, strong and wild like him, about winter nights by the fire, spring mornings in meadows full of flowers, about the life they'd build from the ashes of their pasts. "You can't leave me," she whispered against his burning skin. "Not now. Not after everything. You promised we'd see Montana behind us. You promised, Calder Rourke, and I'll hold you to it." Dawn came gray and cold. Calder's fever had broken, leaving him weak but lucid. He managed a wan smile when he saw her face. "Still here, Wildcat? Where else would I be?" Sarah brought news with the morning light. "I climbed the ridge. There's dust to the south. Riders coming?" "How many?" Annabeth asked, already checking their weapons. "Can't tell, but they're moving fast. They couldn't run, not with Calder barely able to sit up." Annabeth made her choice. "Sarah, take the horses and hide in the ravine. No arguments," she added when her sister started to protest. "Someone has to survive this. Someone has to remember." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Before she left, she hugged Annabeth tight. "I love you. Thank you for coming for me. Thank you for everything. I love you too, sweet girl. Now go." When the riders appeared, Annabeth was ready. She'd dragged Calder behind an overturned table, rifles loaded and waiting. If this was the end, they'd make it count. But the lead rider raised a white flag, a shirt tied to a rifle barrel. As they drew closer, Annabeth recognized Marshal Brennan. His left arm was in a sling, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "Mrs. Forsyth," he called. "I'm coming in alone, just to talk." "Talk from there," she shouted back. He dismounted slowly, keeping his good hand visible. "Lost 3 men last night. Good men with families. Your Apache friends made sure of that. I'm sorry for their families, but they knew the risks. They did." Brennan stepped closer. "Just like I know mine, Mrs. Forsyth. I've been a lawman for 20 years, brought in killers, thieves, every kind of desperate soul. But I've also learned when the law doesn't tell the whole truth." Annabeth kept her rifle trained on him. "Meaning? Meaning I've been to Helena, talked to folks there. Found some interesting records in Judge Morrison's safe. Seems he had quite a business going, buying female prisoners for his establishment. Your sister wasn't the first. Then you know why I killed him." "I do. Just like I know what your husband was. Thanks to that diary, 20 years of upholding the law. And sometimes," he sighed, "sometimes the law protects the wrong people. Are you here to arrest me or not? Marshal?" Brennan looked past her to where Calder lay. "That man needs a doctor. You keep running, he'll die. You know that. We'll manage. Maybe, maybe not." He reached into his coat slowly, pulling out a folded paper. "This is a report saying Annabeth Forsyth died in an Apache raid along with the rest of my posse. Tragic loss. Bodies burned beyond recognition." Annabeth stared at the paper. "Why?" "Because I've got daughters, Mrs. Forsyth, 2 of them. And if some man did to them what was done to your sister," he set the paper on a rock, "well, I'd want to think someone would understand. The other marshals are dead or scattered. I'm the only witness left." He turned back to his horse. "There's a doctor in Willowbrook, 2 hours north, man named Chen. He won't ask questions if you mention my name. After that, well, Canada's awful big, easy for folks to disappear." He mounted up, then looked back. "Take care of that man. Good ones are hard to find." After he'd gone, Annabeth's hands shook as she picked up the paper. Freedom. He'd given them freedom. "Did I dream that?" Calder asked weakly from behind the table. "If you did, we both did." She went to him, tears streaming down her face. "We're free, Calder, free." He pulled her down for a kiss that tasted of blood and hope. Then let's go home. Wildcat, wherever that is, let's go home. Sarah emerged from the ravine, leading the horses. Together, they lifted Calder into the saddle. North lay Canada and the doctor who wouldn't ask questions. Behind them, smoke began to rise as Annabeth burned the marshal's report. Let Annabeth Forsyth die in that cabin. The woman who rode north would need a new name anyway. They rode toward the mountains, toward the future, toward a life built on ashes but no less real for it. 3 broken people who'd found each other in the wilderness and discovered that sometimes grace comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the only law that matters is the one written in blood and love and the fierce determination to protect what's yours. The snow fell soft as whispers on the small trading post they'd built near Moose Creek, just over the Canadian border. 6 months had passed since that desperate flight. 6 months of new names and careful silences. Elizabeth Campbell ran the post with her husband Thomas, while her sister Rose helped with the books and the customers who came to trade furs and supplies. It was a quiet life, but it was theirs. Calder, Thomas now, moved slower these days, the shoulder wound having left him with a permanent ache that worsened in cold weather. But he was alive, and his eyes still lit up when Annabeth entered a room. That was worth any amount of pain. "Storm coming," he said, watching the heavy clouds roll in from the north. "Might be the last travelers we see for a week or more." Annabeth moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Good. I like it when it's just us." Sarah emerged from the back room, ledger in hand. She'd grown in these months, the haunted look fading from her eyes. The nightmares still came sometimes, but less often. "We're low on coffee and ammunition. Should probably make a supply run to Fort McLeod before the deep snow hits." "I'll go tomorrow," Calder said. "Weather should hold that long." But that night, as the first heavy flakes began to fall, a lone rider appeared at their door. Calder answered with his hand on his gun, old habits dying hard. The man who stood there was weathered by wind and years, a minister's collar barely visible beneath his heavy coat. "Forgive the late hour," he said. "I'm Reverend Michael Patterson. My horse threw a shoe about a mile back. I was hoping." "Come in," Annabeth said, ever the hostess despite her wariness. "Sarah, heat some stew. Reverend. You can bed down in the storage room for the night." Over dinner, the Reverend proved to be good company, full of stories from his circuit riding through the territories. But Annabeth noticed how his eyes kept returning to her face, studying her with an intensity that made her nervous. Later, as she showed him to his quarters, he spoke quietly. "I knew Jacob Forsyth years ago, before he found gold, before he married." Annabeth's blood turned to ice, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. Reverend, my name is Elizabeth Campbell." "Of course it is." He smiled, but his eyes were sad. "Jacob was my nephew. Not a good man, even as a boy, cruel to animals, worse to people. I tried to guide him right, but some souls are bent too far to straighten." "Reverend, I also knew his wife," he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Saw them once in Virginia City. Beautiful woman, but her eyes, I've seen that look in horses that have been beaten too long, broken but still breathing." Annabeth said nothing, her hand drifting to where her gun used to rest. "Heard she killed him." The Reverend's voice was conversational, like discussing the weather. "Heard she ran off with his gold and disappeared. Some folks say that was wrong. Me," he shrugged. "I figure God's justice comes in many forms. Sometimes it wears a badge. Sometimes it carries a gun. Sometimes it's a woman who's had enough." "What do you want?" Annabeth whispered. "Nothing, Mrs. Campbell. Nothing at all." He patted her shoulder gently. "Just wanted you to know that if I ever met that woman, I'd tell her she has nothing to fear from me. I'd tell her to live well and be happy. It's what God would want, for broken things to have a chance to heal." He retired to his room, leaving Annabeth shaking in the hallway. When she told Calder, he wanted to run again, but she stopped him. "No, no more running. He could have brought the law, but he came alone. I think he meant what he said. The Reverend left at first light, his horse reshod and supplies replenished. Before mounting up, he pressed something into Sarah's hands, a small, leather-bound book. "For your sister," he said. "Tell her it's never too late for forgiveness, not from God, not from others, but mostly from ourselves." After he'd gone, Sarah gave Annabeth the book. Inside the front cover, written in a careful hand, "For Af, therefore, if any person be in Christ, they are a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. May you find the peace that surpasses understanding. MP." Annabeth clutched the book to her chest and wept for the woman she'd been, for the choices she'd made, for the grace she'd never expected to find. Winter settled over their small corner of the world like a blessing. The trading post became a gathering place for the scattered settlers and trappers, a warm haven against the cold. Annabeth discovered she had a gift for making people feel welcome, for creating the kind of home she'd never had. Sarah thrived, her quick mind perfect for managing accounts and inventory. She even caught the eye of a young Mountie who found excuses to patrol their area more often than strictly necessary. Watching her sister blush and smile, Annabeth felt a mother's pride, and Calder, Thomas, her husband in all but law, was the anchor that held it all together. He'd built them a real bed to replace the rope frame, carved from pine and sturdy as his love. At night, they lay entwined while snow whispered against the windows, and Annabeth marveled at the peace of it. "Do you miss it?" she asked one night. "The scouting? The adventure?" "Every life looks like adventure from the outside," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "This is better. This is real. Even with the ghosts. Especially with the ghosts. Means we survived them." Spring came late but glorious, painting the meadows with wildflowers, on a morning when the whole world seemed washed clean. Calder did something that surprised them all. He'd ridden to Fort McLeod and returned with more than supplies. The circuit judge was making rounds, and there was a wedding to perform. "If you'll have me," he said, going to one knee in the mud outside their trading post, legal and proper this time. Thomas Campbell asking Elizabeth to be his wife, with no shadows between us. "You fool!" Annabeth laughed through her tears. Yes, of course, yes." They married that afternoon with Sarah as witness and half the territory in attendance. The Reverend had spread word, it seemed, of the good folks at the Moose Creek trading post. None of them knew or cared about the past. They saw only what was, a man and woman who loved each other, building something good in the wilderness. That night, as celebration continued in the main room, Annabeth stepped outside. The stars wheeled overhead, brilliant in the clear air. She thought of another night, a gun in her hand and blood on her gold, of all the miles between that woman and this one. Calder found her there. Regrets? No. She leaned into his warmth. That woman, the one who did what she did, I'm grateful to her. She was strong enough to get us here, but I don't need her anymore. What do you need? She turned in his arms, smiling up at him. Just this, just you, just the life we're building one day at a time. He kissed her then, long and deep, and when they finally went inside, it was to a home filled with laughter and light. Sarah was dancing with her Mountie. Old trappers were telling lies about the fish they'd caught. Someone had brought out a fiddle, and music filled the air. Looking around the room, Annabeth felt something she'd never expected to feel again. Hope, not the desperate kind that had driven her across the desert, but the quiet certainty that tomorrow would come, and it would be good. She'd been Annabeth Forsyth once, wife, victim, killer, fugitive. Now she was Elizabeth Campbell, traitor, wife, sister, friend. The transformation hadn't been easy or painless, but standing here in this moment, she knew it had been worth every terrifying step. "Dance with me," Calder said, pulling her into the circle of warmth and music. Always, she promised, and meant it. Outside, snow began to fall again. unseasonable for spring but not unwelcome. It covered the ground in fresh white, hiding the mud and old tracks, making everything new. In the morning, the world would be transformed, but for tonight, there was music and dancing and the miracle of love that had found them in the wilderness. It was enough. It was everything. It was home. And in a small trading post on the edge of forever, two people who had every reason to be broken discovered that sometimes, against all odds, the human heart can heal. Sometimes the trail that begins in darkness leads to light. Sometimes the price of freedom is everything you have, and it's still a bargain. Sometimes grace comes disguised as a second chance, and all you have to do is be brave enough to take it. In the end, that's what the wilderness teaches. Not just how to survive, but how to live, how to choose love over fear, hope over despair, tomorrow over yesterday, how to build something beautiful from the ashes of what was, how to finally be free. Thank you for listening to this tale of love and redemption in the Old West. If you're enjoying these stories around our Wild West campfire, let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We love connecting with fellow lovers of frontier tales. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of passion, survival, and second chances in the untamed American frontier. Share your thoughts on Annabeth and Calder's journey. Did their love redeem them? Or were they damned from the start? Until next time, partners, keep your fires burning and your hearts wild.